What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up a rant and discussing the current state of the meta in Pokemon Pocket. That's right, we're talking about the current state of the meta in Pokemon Pocket and just trying to understand where the meta is and why it is where it is today, and what things need to change in the game to kind of see a significant change in the meta. And one of the big issues that we're going to talk about today is what I call a gatekeeping issue. And so with that being said, let's get into the video. So right now in Pokemon Pocket, there's basically two top decks that are completely running the entire meta, and it's Pikachu EX and Mewtwo Gardevoir. These two top decks are very strong, and it's very hard for other decks to kind of get over that like hump to be pushed into that what we would call like something like an S tier in Pokemon Pocket when it comes to ranking the decks. And anything under that, we start to see things like Starmie EX, Charizard EX, and all these other types of decks that all kind of suffer from the same kind of issue, and the issue that I call gatekeeping. So basically what I mean by that is when you look at something like Starmie EX, for instance, that is a very strong deck. It's super duper aggressive. It has the ability to ramp energy with Misty, yet somehow, and it's pretty obvious, and we're going to get into it, it's just not really breaking that meta barrier to kind of get into those S tier quality of decks, I guess. And the reason it is doing that is happening is again because of gatekeeping. And the gatekeeping issue in this sense is Pikachu EX. Pikachu EX is not just a super duper strong deck into water because it hits water for weakness, but it's also like it does what water decks do, but even better. So the Starmie Articuno decks, for instance, are meant to be like really like aggressive. You can attack in for just 2 energies with your Starmie EX, as well as ramp onto things like your Articuno with your Misty, and just start attacking in really early in the game to kind of like shut your opponent out. But Pikachu just kind of does that better. It's a basic Pokemon in Pikachu EX that takes 2 electric energy and can just start doing what Starmie EX wants to do, but kind of faster. Another issue is when you start looking at like fire decks, for instance, either the Articuno or the the Arcanine or the Charizard decks, they kind of suffer a gatekeeping issue as well, and that gatekeeping issue is water. Even though water should significantly continue to drop, even though I don't think it will. Because people are still trying to play water in the meta, what happens is that also gatekeeps these fire decks from really being able to come up into the top S tier discussion. And so basically what we would need to see is, because Pikachu is so strong, we would basically need to see water players stop playing water decks. Because of the huge amount of electric decks being played. If that happens, then you will see an increase in fire decks becoming playable. First of all, Arcanine is already very strong into the Pikachu deck, because Arcanine hits for exactly 120 with a Giovanni. It takes out both Starmie EX as well as Zapdos EX. And then we all know how strong Charizard is, right? Once Charizard is on the board and it's set up with like 5 energy, it's basically going to win the game unless it already has some damage and it does a bad trade-off where it gets knocked out on the next turn and then you just lose the game. But so basically, if water decks start to decrease more and more because electric decks are so prevalent in the meta, which they will be for a long time, so you actually might see that decrease in water, then you might see an increase in fire. But what happens then is, if you see an increase in fire, those fire decks now gatekeep those Venusaur decks. Venusaur is, in my opinion, one of those decks that has the best opportunity to rise in the meta report due to the other gatekeeping issues. So if electric gatekeeps water, but people still play water and it gatekeeps fire, you might see a decrease in both water and fire. And because water won't be played as much and fire won't be played as much, you will see an increase, hopefully, in Venusaur decks, because Venusaur decks are really strong, because once they get online with a Venusaur and is basically the only Pokemon on your board, if you have every potion or every Erica and you have 4 energies on your Venusaur, it's really hard to get knocked out. So you have all these gatekeeping issues. You have water being gatekept by electric, you have fire being gatekept by water, and you have grass being gatekept by fire. I think I said that correctly. And so until you see a significant drop in certain and any of those decks, you won't see a significant drop in electric ever. You might see a significant drop in water, and that might rise the fire. Or you'll see a significant drop in both fire and water, which will allow grass to kind of come in. Another deck that is super interesting to think about in the discussion of a meta discussion is or are fighting decks. Fighting decks are really good to try and bring into the meta in tournaments, because you know that they're most likely, more often than not, you're going to see 2 decks, and those 2 decks are Pikachu and Mewtwo. And so fighting decks, when you bring them into tournaments, it's kind of a catch-22, because what happens is when you bring in a fighting deck, you're super strong into the majority of the decks that you're going to see, which is electric. But then if you're bringing in things with like Primeape or Machamp, what happens is you're also bad into the other majority of the meta, which is Psychic. So basically, you would have to, if you bring in a fighting deck, you would have to, like, fingers crossed, the majority of the matchups you have are electric. They're good matchups, and you're drawn really well, because even, like, electric is so strong that even with a fighting deck, if electric gets online first and you just start taking out all your Pokemon, you might not be able to do anything anyways. But basically, you would need like a really good matchups in tournaments against all electric, or you might get really bad matchups in Psychic and then just get taken out. Now, of course, certain fighting decks can bring in fighting Pokemon that aren't weak to Psychic, such as Marowak, and we might continue to see that happen. The Primeape and Marowak decks are actually doing pretty well right now, and I think they actually really are strong. But again, as long as there's no significant change in regards to the card pool happening anytime soon, which we might see some significant changes in the card pool coming up, because we have a mini set and we also have a full set coming out in December than January. Then you might see a significant change. But until then, like, electric and psychic, they're just always going to be at the top, and then it's just going to create this like huge like domino effect of gatekeeping issues for all other decks in the meta. So what needs to happen to make some type of significant change in the meta? Well, what would need to change is we would need to see an increase in the card pool. Now, luckily, we have a mini set coming out in December and another new full set coming out in January. Once this happens, is if we start to get certain cards that will help these decks in the lower tiers to kind of bump themselves up, then that's when we will start to see a possible significant change in the meta. For example, if they start coming out with cards that help coin flips, you might start seeing Executor and Marowak decks really get that bump. So Executor is played in Venusaur, so those can help out those Venusaur decks. And if we have cards that help out coin flipping, then we can see an increase in fighting decks, which we already kind of want to play, because we know almost half of the meta that's being played is Pikachu. Another thing that I would like to see is water Pokemon who are not weak to electric. If more water Pokemon start to come out that are now weak to grass, for instance, which often in the TCG and Pokemon, the paper version, of course, you are either weak to 3 different types when you're a water Pokemon. It's either 1, it's electric, 2, it's grass, or 3, it's steel. And for those who don't know why, in the Pokemon lore, water Pokemon are already weak to electric and weak to grass. And so what happens is through cycles of different sets, usually either water Pokemon will be weak to electric or they will be weak to grass. And it really depends where the meta is. So if in the next sets they come out with water Pokemon, I am assuming or hoping that they will be weak to grass. And the other weakness that they sometimes see is steel. And that's because ice type Pokemon and water Pokemon in the TCG are only considered water Pokemon. So that's why you see something like Frostmoth in the game weak to steel, because it's actually an ice type Pokemon that is weak to steel in the anime. So once these things start to happen, you might see an increase in other decks coming up in the meta and kind of taking down the meta decks that we have. So another thing that we might want to see is an increase in stronger dark type Pokemon or fighting type Pokemon. Because until we see that, we will not see a shift in Mewtwo and Pikachu really dropping. Once more cards come out that are stronger fighting type that are weak to grass, hopefully, and a stronger dark type Pokemon, like maybe a dark type EX, which we don't have yet, then you might see a significant drop in Mewtwo because now these stronger dark Pokemon will be played more often, allowing us to kind of drop the Mewtwo down and bring other decks up. And then once that happens, as well as with fighting type, if we get a lot more fighting type Pokemon or just things to support the fighting type, if we see a significant decrease in Pikachu because fighting types are becoming really strong now, you'll see an increase in water and therefore a drop in fire and therefore an increase in grass. Anyways, that is a bit of a rant, and I know, but I felt like I wanted to talk about this because for anybody who thinks that like the meta is just going to change on a dime, it will not. And we will see Pikachu and Mewtwo for quite a long time until cards come out in new sets that support the other decks in Pokemon Pocket. Anyways, with that being said, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, keep cooking.